Hello out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined as always by Alan, and we are going to talk probably mostly basketball because, it's February 4th. But I do want to start us off talking just a little bit of football and something I've been thinking about a little bit as the portal has sort of gone to sleep for a little while, at least until the spring. And looking at the landscape across the SEC, it just occurred to me, and I'm sure this is not a novel thought for people that pay attention to this stuff right after the season's over, but I am looking at all the movement stuff that's happening. All of the SEC teams that made it to the playoffs are replacing their quarterback. And of course, South Carolina, uh, and Ole Miss were the two teams that were like right there closest, and Alabama closest to making it in that didn't make it in. Well, Alabama and Ole Miss are both replacing their quarterback as well. So that leaves South Carolina as like the highest ranked end of season finish that is returning with a quarterback, if that's enough qualifiers for that sentence. So so it kind of got me thinking about what the quarterback landscape looks like in the SEC next season. And I was just wondering, like, how crazy of a statement is it to say that Lenore Sellers is the top quarterback in the SEC going into 2025?
Crazy? No, I'm going to call it pushing the envelope a little bit. Like, I don't think it's impossible. We're going to talk through it a little bit. I think he's definitely in the conversation. I think it kind of depends how you feel about some of the other quarterbacks who are coming back on, those non-playoff teams, the kind of middle of the pack SEC teams you just mentioned, and then a couple transfers coming in. But no, I think the body of work, what you saw last year, especially the second half of the year when he was, fully healthy and actually able to play every week, I think that kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the names that people are familiar with that, like, you could make an argument, I think, for them being in that same conversation as Lenore Sellers. Then we can talk about some of those playoff teams and borderline playoff teams and who they got as their replacements and see if any of them belong in the list too. So the most seasoned vet of the group, I guess, is LSU's Garrett Nussmeier, who put up some pretty gaudy numbers last year. Obviously led the Tigers in a controversial comeback against South Carolina that will go down in chicken curse lore or whatever. um, so that's a name that makes sense to me to bring up. You got Tennessee's Nico. I never say it right.
Iamaliava, I believe.
Iamaliava. There we go. South Carolina didn't have to play them this year, so I didn't ever have to learn it. So, I mean, I thought he had a pretty good freshman campaign. I think you could argue that Lenore Sellers may be more impressive over the course of the season, but he doesn't make a lot of mistakes. And, was a 5-star coming out of high school, and you expect he could take a step forward and be right there. I personally, when I was looking at teams that South Carolina did play, I personally was pretty impressed with Texas A&M's Marcel Reed. Thought that he has a chance to be a really, really good one and made a lot happen as a true freshman. Was that his first start against South Carolina? I feel like it was, or maybe second.
He came in at like halftime against LSU the week before, so I guess that wasn't a start. I can't remember if he has. It was the first like kind of big game he'd started in. I remember that was kind of a narrative going into that week. But yeah, he was pretty young either way.
And then the other name, as far as a returner that I would add to that list, is Florida's DJ Lagway, who, I mean, true stud. It wouldn't surprise me if before it's all said and done, we're talking about him and Sellers both as potential first round picks here in a year or two. So, I mean, as long as they both progress at the level that they showed their flashes at last year, right? And then you got Arch Manning hanging out over there, who obviously played a little bit,
is he
started
related to
some
someone?
games. People seem to like that guy. So I think that's kind of your big group of clusters that you would put Sellers in. And I don't really have a problem ranking Sellers ahead of any of those guys. But I would listen to an argument for almost any of those guys ahead of them too.
Yeah, I think you got it right doing it kind of by tier lists, and we can go through some of the other tiers as well. But I think that's you called it the first group, the first tier, whatever. Um, I do think Nussmeier's probably one right now, just because the level of production in the SEC, what he did in a full season last year, what he did with zero running backs last year. I mean, if you remember, LSU's like entire running back room got hurt in camp or in week one. Um, so I think Nussmeier's there for sure. I think I said before we started doing this, I probably had Sellers at 2 behind Nussmeier, and I think I'm still going to stick with that. Um, Arch Manning is Arch Manning. You know what the potential is. You know what the clips are. You don't know what it looks like when he starts 12 games in a season, and we're just going to have to wait and see. Um, that kind of is what it is to me. It's almost going to be unbearable the next 9 months of, not that it hasn't been already. Every time Quinn Ewers threw an incompletion, people calling for him to be benched, but just what these next 9 months are going to look like and the Arch hype. And then, yeah, Nico right there. DJ Lagway saved Billy Napier's job. I think that's kind of where, and then you mentioned Marcel Reed too. That's kind of where you draw the cutoff. And then just below that group, there's some other guys who I don't. Actually, I'm going to throw Diego Pavia in that group too. You didn't mention him, but I think he proved enough in 1 year at Vanderbilt, just in terms of being, for lack of a better term, a gamer. And also with the production that he can keep Vanderbilt in pretty much any game. So I'm going to throw Diego in that group and then cut it off there.
No, yeah, and as I look through, there's some potential for guys to elevate into life in the SEC like he did last year in this year's transfer group as well. But yeah, I don't know if I put him in that first tier, but I would put him right at the top of the next tier. Before my next plan was to go through some of the top teams in the SEC and kind of tell people who the quarterback is, because I at least before starting to think about this didn't know every single one of them at least. But are there any other names before I do that from any team in the SEC that just like stand out as like, wow, you're really excited to see what they do next year?
I don't think they're necessarily in the same tier as everybody we just mentioned, but Taylon Green was pretty fun to watch at Arkansas for a lot of last year. He kind of helped get that going again with the Bobby Petrino offense and all. I don't know where you rank him or where he fits in this group, but he was at least pretty fun to watch and looking forward to seeing that again.
All right. So I'm looking at the playoff teams or the blue bloods of the SEC real quick, and quite a few of them have some unfamiliar names seemingly taken over. We'll start with Alabama. So obviously, Jalen Milroe was the starter there the last 2 years. He's expected to go somewhere in the draft here in a couple of months. Right now, it would be either Ty Simpson, who's a redshirt junior, and has played sparingly the last couple of years. Although he did score 17 unanswered points off the bench against UCF or USF in 2023. So that's kind of interesting, I guess. And then Keelan Russell, who's a freshman, but highly rated because it's Alabama. I don't really have much of opinion on either at this point. I didn't like scout their high school film or anything like that. I think it's going to be pretty interesting, and that is a team that South Carolina has on the schedule. So, perhaps you can disrupt someone that doesn't have quite as much experience, and we'll see on the upside athleticism that Milroe had last year.
I just take that as kind of any dude who gets recruited by Alabama has the potential to be really good because he wouldn't have signed in Alabama if he didn't. But we haven't seen it. We've barely seen him play. He hasn't played at all in any kind of high leverage situation. So wait and see. But again, the potential's there just because of where it is.
I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this one because I wouldn't consider them overly competitive, at least not at the moment. But I thought it was interesting that Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma ended up at Auburn. They also brought in Deuce Knight, who's a highly rated freshman. So it'd be kind of interesting how that plays out. You got an offensive system that can work there, we think, under Hugh Freeze. But, still has yet to materialize. But that's just like one of those like kind of intriguing ones, but we'll see.
No, I agree. I don't have much to add. They're not on South Carolina's schedule. If you can cut down the interceptions for Arnold, he can be awesome. But that was kind of the bugaboo at Oklahoma, was just too many turnovers.
Not on South Carolina's schedule, but a team that South Carolina is very familiar with, and obviously a team that the nation's very familiar with, the 2024 SEC champions. Georgia probably is going to have Gunnar Stockton under center. Obviously, Carson Beck had a season-ending UCL injury in the first half of the SEC championship game. Stockton was able to finish that off, win the SEC championship for Georgia, and then he did all right, I guess, against Notre Dame, but they ended up losing that one. I don't think I've seen enough to make me be like, oh yeah, he is that dude. But he seems kind of like a Georgia quarterback to me. Like he seems like he's going to be able to be efficient enough that if they play good defense and hit those play action passes, they're going to be fine.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. He does feel like the very Stetson Bennett kind of mold, where he's probably not going to win games on his own, but he's also, I don't want to use the term game manager, but that's kind of what I'm describing. And I think probably stepping into an SEC title game and a playoff game is going to help him long term. Just if nothing else, he looked a little deer in headlights in the Notre Dame game, and that probably shouldn't be an issue going forward.
All right, going back to South Carolina's schedule and going back to those teams that were right there competitive for the last playoff spot, Ole Miss seemingly did not, the portal master did not hit the portal this time to find his quarterback. So either, to me, that means he feels good about what he's got on campus, which I'll read off in just a second, or he's going to look again in the spring. Right now, he's got a redshirt sophomore in Austin Simmons and a redshirt freshman in AJ Maddox. The Austin Simmons also plays pitcher for Ole Miss's baseball team. He's left-handed. He hasn't played a ton. Been reasonably efficient, 282 yards on 19 of 32 passing last year. But yeah, I guess we'll see what he has, but I don't know. Again, another one I don't know a ton about.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say about him is, if I'm remembering correctly, he did come into the Georgia game when Jackson Dart got hurt for a little bit and led a touchdown drive, if I'm not mistaken, which it's a one drive sample size, but that still showed something at least. So he's not completely new to playing some big SEC spots, but I don't imagine they're going to get the same production they got out of Jackson Dart.
Two more on South Carolina's schedule, though I wouldn't necessarily call them like elite teams the way the other two were. Missouri went into the portal and got a Bo Pribula from Penn State, but that's a guy that really hasn't played a whole lot. He got a little backup action behind Drew Aller, completed 74% of his passes and 5 touchdowns to 1 interception in 2024. So, pretty efficient. Also, Drew Pine is still around if they need any help, kind of bridging the gap there. And then at Oklahoma, you got another transfer, John Mateer, redshirt junior from Washington State. And we were talking before we got on here, pretty efficient out there at Washington State, but, life is a little bit different in the SEC. Know anything about either those guys? Any of those guys give you pause that they're going to make a huge impact?
Yeah, Mateer's very interesting to me, just because it's kind of that, obviously Lincoln Riley's not there anymore. It's kind of that quarterback who transfers into Oklahoma and has a chance to go insane thing. He did kind of put up some video game numbers at Wazoo last year. It was 29 touchdowns to only 7 picks, over 3,000 yards, completed 65% of his passes. Like, obviously it's kind of boom or bust potential, right? Like, if you can put up those kind of numbers or something close to it in the SEC, we're having a completely different Oklahoma discussion. If the game doesn't translate, Oklahoma's probably going 5-7 and Brent's getting fired. I just think that might be the most boomer bust situation in the SEC. Just a high potential, but a very low floor for Mateer, in my opinion.
Yeah, the stakes are definitely high all around there. So, I'm looking at South Carolina's schedule. I'm thinking about these returning quarterbacks. I'm thinking about what we do know about the newcomers. And it's hard to not feel like you have week to week, usually the better guy. Unfortunately, you don't get to just have the two quarterbacks duel it out, and that's how the game's won. There's going to be a lot more aspects, but I do think for the first time that I can ever remember. You probably feel like you have the best quarterback every week on your schedule throughout the season, maybe with an exception here or there. But I don't ever remember having that feeling in my 34 years following South Carolina football.
No, it's pretty unique. It's like I said, maybe when you go to LSU, you don't think you have the better one there. But other than that's the only one I think you're even having a discussion about, to be completely honest with you. I don't know exactly what the quarterback situation is at Virginia Tech going into next year. And obviously Clemson's got Cade Klubnik back, who I think Sellers is better than. But yeah, I think Nussmeier's just kind of the one. And then other than that, you've got that week to week you just talked about. We didn't even mention
Yeah.
Kentucky's either. That's on the schedule. They got Zach Calzada from Texas A&M, and then FCS at Incarnate Word. Now he's back in the SEC.
Yeah, and he had a good season at an Incarnate Word, and obviously has played some SEC football before. To me, that feels like most of the last couple of Kentucky
Yeah.
quarterbacks, where it's like, yeah, that's a starter. Like he's certainly not a like liability, but he's not someone that's gonna
Yeah.
change the math for you too much either. And I think that's what was so genius slash, fortunate or however you want to put it about Vandy going out and getting Pavia last year is that dude changes the math of your entire
Yep.
team. And I don't know if you're one of those lower tier SEC teams, I think it's kind of worth going for the upside. and I don't know that he brings the upside that you're looking for.
Yeah. That's kind of where I go back to John Mateer again, just where like Oklahoma needs someone to be like Heisman level for this thing to work. And I don't think Mateer's going to be, but like, I don't know, any quarterback with a 4-to-1 touchdown interception ratio and 3,000 yards has a chance to be.
The funny thing about this conversation, and we won't drag it on for too much longer, but the funny thing about this conversation is we also didn't even factor in the step forward that I think Lenore Sellers is probably going to be able to make. And we
Yep.
also didn't factor in the fact that I think his wide receiver room is going to be substantially better this year than it was last year. Now maybe you trade that off with a little bit of a step back at tight end and running back, and it all comes out in the wash. I don't know, but I think we could see gaudier passing numbers from Sellers this coming year, in addition to what he did on the ground.
Yeah, and I think even though you got some questions on the interior, you're going to be better at the offensive line too, just with a guy like Josiah Thompson getting into his second year, or Casey Henry having a year under his belt, and everything like that.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll talk a lot more football as we head towards football season. And we do have the occasional offseason article on GamecockScoop.com right now. Talked a little bit about the stadium today. Anything that you have to add about the news that came out about the stadium today? Did you even see?
I read the press release. For those who didn't see, the Williams-Brice Stadium project received state approval, and they selected a internationally acclaimed design firm. Their words, not mine. I guess that just means they can have the money they need from the state of South Carolina to do this, which is a step, but nobody put a shovel in the dirt today.
Yeah, no, I feel like every press release on this we've gotten lately, and probably the next 10 will be like, hey, we cleared some more red tape to one day
Yep.
do something.
Yeah, that's
And
pretty much what I took from it.
And hey, it's fine. I put out the press release and I'm going to talk about it, and because I am excited about the project. But yeah, we're still a long way off from it actually coming to fruition. All right, let's talk a little basketball. Let's sandwich this, right? We started with some good. We started with some football. We'll end with some women's basketball, but let's talk about the cursed men's basketball team here for a second. Once again, I mean, I don't even remember the last time we talked and like who all they've played since then. But you can just throw a dart at the schedule, and they probably lost by 1 or 2 possessions, and that's kind of where we're at right now. So most recently, wow, where did my cursor go? You were just there. Who did they just play? I'm doing a terrible job.
They played A&M Saturday.
Yes.
Another, again, throw a dart, play very competitively and tightly with a top 15 opponent, have it down to a 1 possession game late, end up losing by 4. I thought it was perfect. Lamont Parrish just came in and said it feels like Groundhog Day because it's just these games all feel like they're starting to run together where you're not getting blown out by really. I mean, he lost by 11 at Georgia. It felt a little closer than that. Probably weren't in that game as much as some of these other ones, but you lose by 4 to A&M. You lose in overtime to Mississippi State. You lose by 1 to Florida, by 3 to Vandy, by 3 to Auburn. It's just, I said it to you before we started. They don't look like a team that's 0-9 in the league. They play better than that. I think they're more talented than that. But the record is what it is, and the record's 0-9.
It's gonna break the right way eventually. You just gotta believe that, right? And I do think the schedule softens up a little bit. Honestly, last time we talked, we were talking about the difficulty of the schedule coming up, and they've played so much better during that stretch than I thought that they would, and they still just keep losing in the most difficult to watch ways. If we're hitting on a high note, Colin Murray Boyles just yesterday was named to the Oscar Robertson Trophy midseason watch list. He's been quietly having a really great season. So he's one of only 2 players in Power 4 right now to average at least 15 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal, 1 block a game while shooting over 50% from the floor. And still, every time I watch, I feel like they should give Colin Murray Boyles the ball more. It's such a weird feeling, you know, I don't know. By the end, he's got the full stat line, but I still feel like it rarely feels like, oh man, he's taking over the game right now, you know? But anyway, so what do you see as the issue here? I mean, is it simply you don't have a point guard, which we talked a little bit about last week, and their big issue has been the consistent shoot yourself in the foot turnovers at the worst possible moments, the little drought streaks at the worst possible moments, or I don't know. Are you seeing any growth over these last couple of weeks? Are we seeing any movement at all, or is it just like you said, deja vu all over again?
Yeah, I think the point guard thing is most of the battle. It's just that situation right now is not. What is that noise?
I don't know. I don't hear anything.
What the hell? I heard like a squeaking noise. Anyway, I think the situation's probably mostly about the point guard. We talked about this in the summer. You don't have a Talon Cooper replacement. You're going to have to make it up in the aggregate. You haven't really been able to do that. I also think there's just a lack of shot making. I know that sounds really simple. That sounds really boring, but Miles Studi is still out with his injury. You don't know when he's going to be back. It might be this season. That's blood clots in his legs. That's a lot more serious in basketball. Right now, just Jacoby Wright, Zach Davis, those guys aren't shooting well enough from deep to kind of offset losing your best 3-point shooter. And there's just points in these games where you look at it and go, someone's got to hit a bucket. That's kind of, again, that's a really simple way of looking at basketball. Just put the ball in the hoop, but it's not a great shooting team. And I do think this still is a pretty good defensive team. I think they're still top 50 in the country in defense on KenPom, but you can't win every game 50 to 49. You got to hit some shots. And they just don't have a lot of guys who can consistently knock down shots.
Yeah, and one of those guys we were kind of hoping heading into the season might be a weapon there. Cam Scott hasn't really been much of an impact. They tried to get him in there, I feel like, earlier in the season a good bit, but I don't know. Maybe he's just not ready yet, especially defensively. I felt like at times he looked a little bit like a liability earlier in the season. So yeah, I mean, hopefully that's a guy that you keep around in this era of the portal and can kind of develop a little bit and see him reach his potential with you instead of Texas or wherever, NC State or one of these other places that finished close for him in his high school recruitment. And yeah, I don't know. As I started to think about big picture, long term, the big question is going to be, does Colin Murray Boyles play his way into a pretty good NBA draft spot? I don't know if he could play his way into a lottery pick this year. So maybe that's something that you could still dangle as a carrot. Maybe you come back and play your way into a lottery pick, especially with NIL and stuff. Maybe you can make it worth his while. But I mean, it's got to be a pretty discouraging season to play through, and you don't necessarily feel like you have a immediate impact, freshman or something that's coming. I mean, Hayden Simeon, I think is a good player. It's going to be interesting.
Eli Ellis would be the best
Eli
chance there.
Eli Ellis definitely should help with that shooting problem that we've been talking about. I'll be interested to see how he is on defense. I just don't know his game well enough, I guess. I know the league he plays in is very much a high scoring league, very much about the points. So yeah, I don't know. It feels like you're in kind of no man's land for a little bit. If I'm looking at Lamont Paris as a coach and like giving him his props, like this team has gotten punched in the gut 9 straight times in a row, and they so far keep showing up and keep playing in these competitive games, just get punched in the gut again. And I do think there's something to be said for that resilience and what that says about him as a coach and them and their buy-in and all of that. I don't know how much longer that can hold out in a season like that, but yeah, I don't know. Give me a little bit of a diagnosis, I guess, on the South Carolina men's basketball program as it is. I think you don't have those 2 injuries we talked about earlier. You're probably sitting at least a lot more mediocre looking season than the below average one we've seen so far.
I think at this point, I don't take anything. I shouldn't say anything. I don't take a lot long term for this. I think it's pretty clear they misfired in the portal. They didn't have what they needed between Thomas, Pringle, and Butler coming back this year. You got to fix that. You got to get a point guard. I think the fact that you still have 4 guys in this recruiting class is a good sign. It doesn't. I kind of use it as a mulligan almost. I know people would say that was his first year, but I didn't know what to do with that first year. There wasn't much left after Frank. This is one of those years that can happen once. It can't happen again. I do think it's very easy to look around the league, though, at Missouri right now, who went 0-18 in the league and was way worse than you are. I mean, they were getting blown out in most of those games last year. They're 3rd in the SEC right now. They're 6-2. That doesn't mean you are going to fix it that quick, but you can. It's not, a death sentence for half a decade of your program if you have a year like this. But I think you've got 1 year to kind of turn it. You can't do this again next year. You can't be 0-9 again at this time.
And the year before Mizzou went 0-18, they had a pretty good year too, right?
They made the tournament,
kind of a similar trajectory. And maybe that is going to be life in that middle tier of the SEC. If you're not one of these top tier programs that can just, recruit 5 stars like it's nothing and, have very little turnover even when you do because you are, building your bench and all of that. Like most programs aren't built like that. So if you have a guy that can attack the portal, which I think Paris has shown that he can, just like Dennis Gates at Missouri, you might just have this 1 year on, 1 year off thing where you're kind of having a year in the wilderness where you figure out, okay, I want to keep 2 of these 5 guys, but then we got to turn over the roster or whatever. And we'll see what happens next year. I do think if you could get Connor Boyles to come back, and there's a couple of other foundational pieces that have shown some flashes. Ugasak, you already mentioned.
Yep.
And then you can kind of build around there. That I could see it happening, but it's a long way off from now, obviously. Let's talk about something more exciting. The women's program continues the tear that they're on. Since we last spoke, they won a big game against LSU, 66-56. They actually trailed for quite a lot of that game, but just kind of steadily chipped away, and by the end, left no doubt. Then followed that up just 3 days later, which is tough, with a road trip to ranked Tennessee, beat them by 7, and then this past Sunday beat Auburn 83-66. That one was kind of close for a little bit. They pulled away late. And then, of course, pretty cool scene as you're celebrating Aaliyah Boston, made it in jersey up in the rafters.
Asia Wilson.
Oh my gosh, yes. Aaliyah Boston.
You're good.
Asia Wilson. there's a lot of A's.
Yeah, her drills will be up there too. Give it
I'll
a few
say,
years.
Aaliyah Boston's coming. Just give it a little bit of time. But yeah, Asia Wilson. So yeah, tell me a little bit about Sunday and that whole scene, and then just kind of where you see them at this point in the season, which their schedule does not does not ease up at all. You got a pretty big road trip against Texas here, or no? Is that a home game?
No, it's in Austin on
Yeah,
Sunday.
yeah. Road trip against Texas here on Sunday. Number 4 team in the country, and then short week later got a home match against UConn. I can't read a schedule today. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, tell me where we're at.
Yeah, first of all, Sunday was cool. It just is. It's you think about Asia Wilson and kind of. And I'm not from here, but I know pretty much everybody who is just what it means when the number 1 recruit in the country is from your hometown and decides to stay home when she had offers from UConn and Tennessee and a lot of other places that were a lot better than South Carolina at the time she committed. I don't know if people realized that they had never won an SEC title or been to a Final Four as a program before she committed, and she still decided to stay home. That's the kind of player that can change everything and did. It was just kind of cool to see that, I guess, appreciation reciprocated, and her parents were on the court. It was pretty cool. Even as somebody who wasn't around here when she was playing in school. As for the team itself,
hold up before you move on.
yeah,
I just want to comment. That is a really good reminder. Like we've gotten so used to just the dynastic sort of success that has taken place over the last decade or whatever. Like this was not a blue blood program. It became one because of Don Staley and because of players like Asia Wilson. So yeah, really cool to see some of those early foundational steps coming back around, being recognized for the foundation that they set. Anyway, go ahead.
No, yeah. It's someone else told me the story that the first time they'd ever got 7,000 people at a women's game was Asia Wilson's official visit game the year before she came to school, and now you're averaging over 16,000. Yeah. It is like it does feel kind of full circle in that sense. It was pretty cool. I think this team's right where it needs to be. Texas is going to be tough. You're going into someone else's gym, the top 5 team. That feels like about a coin flip. But honestly, even if you lose on Sunday, I think you're getting what you need from Joyce Edwards. She looks like the superstar you thought she was going to be. She's led the team in scoring, I think 5 games in a row now. Your guard play has been better for the last month. Raven Johnson's kind of broken that early season funk. Malaysia Fulwiley's broken her early season kind of slump. It looks like a well-oiled machine. It looks like about what it's supposed to look like. I'm very curious to see how Sunday goes, just because you can pretty much wrap up an SEC regular season title if you win at Texas. You can still get it even if you lose because you'd be tied with them, and if you just won out, you can share it. But yeah, no, this is right. I think this is exactly where it needs to be right now, even if they do lose to Texas or to UConn. Just big picture, you're talking about March, getting a 1 seed, trying to win another national championship. I don't think there's a team that can't beat. I'll put it that way. I don't know if they're going to win every tournament game again, but there's even UCLA who beat them by 15 in November. I think if they played again on a neutral court, that game looks very different right now.
Yeah, back to my brain fog. I was quickly looking at Texas's schedule, and I was like, "What SEC team did they lose to?" Obviously, South Carolina. A couple weeks ago on the 12th. But yeah, so I think that's a big one. And how are you feeling about? I kind of zoned out as I was reading that last little bit. Did you say anything about the UConn matchup? How are you feeling about how they stack up outside of conference? Obviously,
Yeah,
that is the one time they fell.
That's kind of it's a good test. I'm never going to pick South Carolina to lose a game in Colonial Life Arena. I think we're kind of just to that point where they've won 70 in a row there now, and the last loss was during COVID without a crowd. Like, as long as they're playing at home, I like them against anybody. That includes UConn. I think it's a very tough matchup. I think they've got their own kind of Joyce Edwards with true freshman playing 4 with Sarah Strong. It's going to be fun to see them go head to head. Paige Becker's going to do what she does, but I don't know if they're going to beat UConn down and take a 30-point lead like last year's game, but I think this team's close enough to what last year's was to feel good about playing a home game against this UConn team. And I'd say 7 out of 10 times you play that game, you win. And we'll see what happens when they do play in 2 weeks.
Yeah, to me, it feels like you would need a career scoring game from their guards, which is possible.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't bet on it for sure. All right, we'll have full coverage over the next few days of both the men's and women's teams, and then obviously that big game day matchup on Sunday against Texas for the women. And we'll be back here next week to talk a little more off-season football, talk some more basketball. In the meantime, this has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. We'll see you.